friends. This is Reflections, a program sponsored by Paducah Cooperative Ministry, where together we do God's work with human hands. I'm Karen Winkel, the pastor at United Church of Paducah. I'm one of your co-hosts. And your other co-host is Gregory Waldrop, who pastors at Fountain Avenue United Methodist. Good to see you, Gregory.
Glad to be right here with you, and glad to be here with you all. We have a special treat in store for the program today. We have two women of the cloth, as my friend Ann Fraley used to call herself. Not actually clergy women, but in fact women who have focused and will share their gifts around textile arts today. And we have with us Patty Goddard, who is a member of Broadway United Methodist Church and a volunteer at the Quilt Museum.
Right.
And welcome, Patty.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, glad you're here. And we have Ann Fraley, who is a member at Fountain Avenue United Methodist Church and also a volunteer at the Quilt Show at the Quilt Museum. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Tell us about how you got interested in the textiles, the art of fabric and cloth.
I learned to sew when I was about 7 years old. I was the only girl in the family, so I had my own bedroom and would stay back in the bedroom and sew. And I didn't make doll clothes. I made clothes for myself. But I found I just loved handling fabrics and the color and the feel of them. And I started to quilt when I was in the 7th grade, and it was something to do and something I loved doing. And went on, I have a degree in textiles, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
A lot of my colleagues went into textile research, but I liked the costume and the history angle of it. And one thing I've particularly liked is the fact that textiles have been around for so long. So it's partly history, partly social science. It's very much a woman's kind of thing. It has been over the many generations, the millennia. And so I just feel connected to a lot of that. But when I go on a trip, I wind up, my souvenirs are always fabrics, you know, a piece of lace or hand weaving or batik or something. And of course my house shows that too. What about you, Patty?
Well, I'm a lot like you. I learned how to sew at an early age. My parents and my grandparents all sewed, so I was around sewing from an early age. And I took home ec in high school and junior high school and sewed mostly on garments until I was a young adult. And then when 20 or so years ago, when people figured out how to do quilts on the machine, that was something that just really pushed my buttons. I'd always enjoyed quilts, but I didn't especially care for handwork. So the quilting on the machine is something that I really come to enjoy a lot, and I spend a lot of time doing it now, and I'm really thankful to be in an area where that's an art that's appreciated so much.
Really? You were in the area, I guess.
That's right.
Know, it's been appreciated in all across, particularly the heartlands of the United States. Quite a while now.
I was thinking, you know, in reading some of the scripture and the Christmas scriptures that are so familiar to us. And one of them says, "And the baby Jesus was wrapped in swaddling clothes and laid in a manger." And I've always been, of course, drawn to that and thinking, what a perfect way to treat a newborn baby. And what were those swaddling clothes like? And they were probably common, handmade, of course, at that time. Weaving is one of the very oldest arts in the world. Weaving and perhaps pottery have been around for a long time. And if you think about the scriptures, just from the very beginning to the end, they talk about the garments of this or that, or the robes of this or that, or the importance of what they packed up to take with them. The tents were, of course, woven. There's a wonderful passage in Exodus, too, that says they have just built a tent of the worship and bring your linen drapery and the purples and the golds and the fine threads and bring them to decorate the house of worship. And so I've kind of zeroed in on those and really enjoy bringing that into sanctuaries, worship spaces that we have now. Of course, I go to Gregory's church, and he's always been so generous about, if I say, how about this for Sunday, he said, of course, that'd be wonderful. So it's an easy way to bring in the arts, which I think most of us think are just so important in a worship experience. is to have something aesthetic around us. We all have good music, but now we can have textiles to bring in color and images in many cases, not always, but sometimes images along with just the sensation. And I think we all gravitate that, just like the baby Jesus being wrapped in swaddling clothes. If we come into a worship space that is warm and we remember being wrapped in quilts as we grew up, I bet, or wrapped in blankets, or the scarves when it was cold, or our mother wrapping something around us. It's just a very aesthetic and I think quite theological thing to have happen in our sanctuaries. Or it makes any place a sanctuary, perhaps, if there are meaningful fabrics in it.
You mentioned that it's largely a women's art, and that's true. It's still true today, but there's a lot of males who are quilters and probably in other textile arts too. I know that a lot of people know that St. Paul was a quilt maker, or he was a sail maker or a tent maker. I've forgotten, but that's essentially being a seamstress, although it's a utilitarian object.
Good
so
point.
It's certainly not anything that men are excluded from.
Right.
And there are several of the grand prize winners in the Quilt Museum who are also men.
Yeah.
So we definitely don't want to exclude the male
Right. And
participants.
a whole host of ways that both genders really are captured and take advantage of the textile arts. We all know the sort of attraction, the fascination with the Christmas costumes, don't we? Of the Christmas pageant. Isn't that one of the things we remember, whether it's a bathrobe or whether it's a more ornately put together? We remember those kind of what we wore and what that is a part of the.
Well, another point to that too, I was thinking about for the millennia, again, people identify themselves by what they wore. I was thinking about, you're saying in the crash scene, what makes a king? It's what the person is wearing.
Right.
That's how you know a king, or Mary for that matter.
Right.
She's frequently draped in blue, and you can identify Mary. Well, think back to the Crusades, or even again back to biblical times, people used flags, another form of textiles, to identify who they were.
Right.
And when they got to a new place, they would put their flag down so that this is my home for the moment. Very important, and of course cathedrals over the years have used them for utilitarian purposes, both to kind of temper the coldness of the stone, but also to identify who they were and why they were there.
Right.
And we still do. Think of, how do you know the cheerleaders from the football players? It's by what they wear,
Right.
of course. And how do you know the minister, for that matter?
Right.
In many churches,
Exactly
the minister
right.
will wear something distinctive, and the choir.
Well, tell us about some of the things you do in the churches and you're connected with, or that you've seen done in places that help us get a sense of the textile arts as it serves the church and its purposes.
Patty, you want to show them your quilt there? That stunning quilt.
Well, this is a quilt that I made for Broadway United Methodist Church here in Paducah. And I made this to support our building campaign, which anybody who's been by there recently has seen that our building is under construction and construction add-ons right now. And I designed this picture of the church building itself, since it was a quilt that was designed to support that aspect of it. And each of the small multicolored blocks has a signature of individual members of the congregation. And I used all different colors and all different fabrics to represent the diversity of the congregation, but the overall unity of our church body when we're all together.
That's a traditional.
That's a traditional pattern. Rail fence, I think, is one of the names for it. Most quilting patterns have many names. It's bordered by two borders on the outside. The inner border, I've embroidered the words to the hymn, "Blessed be the tie that binds," because that's going around the individual church members, and it's pulling them all together or binding them all together into one congregation. And the outer border has the years for the church, the year it was founded, and then this year. And this is our 175th anniversary, so that was important to us. And I put symbols of Easter on the outside, mostly because I thought this would be displayed during the springtime when the quilt show, which is usually around Easter, and it would be used as a seasonal decoration in the church. And the Easter symbols are the Easter lily and the dogwood. And on the outside edges that you can't see, I've got the symbols Alpha and Omega, the Greek letters, which going from left to right are the beginning and end. And so that's another spiritual symbol. On the top there's a dove, which would symbol during Easter Christ's resurrection.
Now, you were saying before we went on air that this isn't the first time a quilt has been made at Broadway United Methodist with signatures.
Right, this is our second signature quilt. Our old one is about 75 years old, and so we decided that every church needs a signature quilt once a century, so
right.
that we can capture as many members of the ongoing congregation as we can.
I wish the folks could see the lovely stitches that are in, particularly the borders and the blue that borders the church itself. It's I've always appreciated particularly the stitching of a quilt.
Thank
and
you.
It's a lovely design and a lovely
That's
pattern.
one of the advantages of living here in this area, is we have such a good resource of teachers and the museum. And I've learned a lot of the techniques that I used in that quilt since I've lived here, which I've lived here since 2002, even though I've been quilting for 15 or 20 years. I've learned a whole lot in the last 5 years.
And this is displayed in the church sanctuary and the
Right,
church
it's
fellowship?
it's new this year, so we displayed it during the quilt show in Easter time. And our plans are probably to display it sometime during the spring part of the year for the rest of the time. Of course, we won't know exactly where until we get our new construction all done.
Yeah, sure.
Can you imagine how good it would feel to walk in the church and know that your signature was up there? And again, a small part of a large, warm collection that we call a congregation. And it will be forever. That would add so much. I mean, architecture is wonderful, of course, and it's part of, spirituality about the building, a cathedral, stained glass windows. But again, the warmth of this brings it home, doesn't it?
And the nice colors, I think, are a good
yes.
addition to a lot of architecture. It doesn't have the opportunity for lots of colors.
That's right. It's
A
beautiful.
story from my seminary days sort of connects this to larger theological issues as well. My buddy was typing his paper and he mistyped. He was saying Jesus took my guilt away, and he mishit it and it put quilt in there. Jesus took my quilt away. And the professor circled it and put the arrow out and said, "Not to worry, Jesus promised to send a comforter."
Oh,
So
we all need a
anyway,
comfort.
we all need
That's
a
right.
comfort. We do
That may be
comforter.
one of the images of Jesus that we like the best, the
Really?
comforter.
Right.
Really,
Yeah.
really.
Let me point out over here on the right stand, first of all, on the left part of that, I brought 4 pieces that are commercially made for altars. In most Christian churches, we celebrate certainly Christmas and Easter, but many of us celebrate Advent, Pentecost, Epiphany, Lent, some of these other seasons of the liturgical year. And over the many, many years throughout history, certain colors have come to be associated with those seasons. For example, red is Pentecost, purple is frequently not only Lent, but also Advent, although it can be blue for Advent. Green is used for the long, long season that we just call the green season frequently, or ordinary times. White and gold are the colors of the festival seasons of Christmas and Easter. So I put those up, and a lot of churches do have these commercial sort of a tapestry fabric in the correct colors. And if you visit a church, really anywhere in the world, don't be surprised to see those specific colors used at the specific time.
Yeah, and it's a way of helping us redeem the time.
Absolutely.
Sort of let the time, the season of the church of the year tell the story of Jesus as well, and the colors.
And they're not secular seasons. There are definitely sacred seasons,
Right.
which is quite different. If you step in a church, it's not going to have what the secular world is displaying at the moment, because we go, again, by a different kind of time scheme, and it was built around trying to help us understand the life of Jesus. But what I like to do, because I've traveled a lot, but also theologically, I feel like that sometimes we get sort of insular. We think of just our space and our time. But I'd love to have images from around the world, but also fabrics that people in other countries have touched. So I sometimes tell the children, where is God's world? Well, the answer, of course, is everywhere. So one way to help remind us that that's the truth is to bring in these other images. I particularly like this one I put in the middle. That's a piece of batik that was made in China. I bought it at an import store. But as you notice, it's the Nativity with the sheep all gathered around very prominently. It amused me. Mary, I believe, is there with her arms crossed in a rather sacred position, like, I guess, thankfulness, but also awe. This is my baby. This is special.
Yeah.
And the baby looks very comfortable, again, wrapped in swaddling clothes. But again, kind of an Asian version that I love. And I have things like that from all over the world. On the right, I put a piece of wonderful mud cloth from Mali. On here, on the table, we have a wonderful shawl that someone gave me from Egypt. Next to that is a piece from Guatemala, a piece from Indonesia, and then Bali. Again, sometimes it's just the color, sometimes it's the symbols like the cross, or in this case, I love the blue batik from Bali because of the fish, which of course is a Christian symbol I sometimes use on a communion table.
So how would you use these fabrics in a worship space?
Well, usually we try to help people focus on the altar or the front of the church. And so I could drape one of these on the altar or sometimes layer them like I do here, but trying to stick with one of the traditional colors, but in a non-traditional sort of fabric. Of course, many of the churches have a World Communion Sunday, and that's my chance to show everything all at once, to really focus on that.
We can
also
delight of all of that out on Communion Sunday.
We had a good time, didn't we? People came in the church, and the whole front of the church was draped in fabric, not only from all over the world, but frequently touched by human hands, which is important too. It wasn't just made by a factory here and a factory there. And I thought that was very important. But again, this makes it more lively, more creative, more artistic. Sometimes I like to say, if worship is boring, we're doing it all wrong. I don't want people to know when they walk in the door exactly what they're going to see or what they're going to hear. Right, Gregory?
Right.
That's right, Gregory.
Always that little surprise
That's right.
piece to...
That's how God works. God always has a surprise for us. And I'd like for our sanctuary to reflect that. So we're using tradition, but putting it in a more creative way. I started to say contemporary, but people have always done this. It's not a new idea. So I encourage other people to do the same thing. I think a lot of us have souvenirs that we've brought back or gifts we've been giving. If you look at them in a new way and think, what kind of a connection do they have to the message of God? Then we can begin to make our church a little more lively, perhaps, out of that little surprise and element. And get people to think, too. Sometimes I've asked the children, why do you think this is on the altar? And they have to think, why did she put that on the altar? And that's a great teaching tool, not only for children, but adults.
You're reminding me that the seminary that I attended had a focus on worship and the arts, and they had a fabric library in the room off the worship space, and they had, all kinds of things, candles and, different vessels and things like that, but they had a rather substantial inventory of different kinds of fabrics, some that were from other cultures, like your Guatemalan fabric, some African things, but then just also things that had been made commercially but had visual interest
Right.
Yes.
and could be used either singly or combined with other things, and you could just kind of go open the cupboard doors and start
See what
looking
it-
around and find
Frequently,
find some
too,
things.
we combine these with different kinds of crosses, different other images, sometimes an open Bible. Other things, I have a wonderful gold sign that says peace, which of course is the central message of the church, so that's appropriate. So it's not just the fabrics necessarily, but they're kind of the color that comes with it, and they form the background for other things. Let me show you a couple more. If I have this. This I particularly love. This is called a mola, and they're made by women in the San Blas Islands off the coast of Panama. It's a technique called reverse applique. And frequently they're animals or sometimes abstract designs. But I happened to see this one that has a cross in it. And I didn't even finish it off. I just pin it up the way it is. Again, it's an image from South America or Central America. I was in an import store not long ago and found this wonderful piece. Can you see what that one displays that's maybe a little different? We sometimes see the image of Mary riding the donkey going to Bethlehem. But look in this one, the babe has already been born.
Right, she's riding it away.
That's right. I bet they're escaping to Egypt. And I love it that Joseph is carrying their possessions wrapped in a piece of fabric, as a matter of fact, on his head. He's got a walking stick. Mary has a red halo. That's how we know it's Mary. And she's carrying the babe on a donkey going somewhere away from where he was born. And of course, you notice they have dark skins, which is nice too. I don't know where this was made, but it was definitely made in one of the countries that have darker skins. I love that image. Then I brought a couple more too. This is an old saddlebag from Turkmenistan that I was given. Here's where you hook it onto the back of the horse or the camel. This was probably made around 1900 or 1910. It's all vegetable dyed, very rich, very thick. I use this in my living room, but I have put it on the altar too. Again, it's a part of the country sometimes we don't acknowledge. And it's amazing what humans can do. Think of the complexity of this piece.
Right. Just for an ordinary
Mhm.
working
A
bag
saddlebag.
there. Yeah.
A saddlebag. Textiles can be just endlessly creative. And then this may be a little more familiar to people. This is called Kuba cloth, and it was made in Central Africa. And again, we talked about the genders. The men strip the inner bark off of trees and weave. The men are the weavers in Africa generally. They weave a plain backing and give it to the women, and the women take the same material and do stitches, kind of like cross stitches on top of it. And again, this looks geometric, but if you look closer, there's so much variety and variation. These were originally used as part of skirts. They would wrap them around with a sash, and they took so much time to make, they were considered extremely valuable. People used them as trade goods, you know. Instead of money, they would swap Kuba cloth. So again, every piece of fabric has a story.
Yeah.
At least the ones I like.
Sure.
All have a story behind them, and therefore, I think they're very appropriate for a sanctuary, for a sacred space, because after all, isn't that what the church is a story of people and what people can do.
Well, if someone viewing today had an interest in exploring the use of textiles in their worship space, how might they begin?
I would think certainly go to the minister first and get familiar with the colors of the seasons. And then try to think what they already have that might work for that. Perhaps I always like to work several people together. And maybe pick just one season, let's say Lent. It has a lot of emotion attached to Lent. What could we do just for the 6 Sundays of Lent? And the color is purple, but of course there are many shades of that. There are many images. Lent tends to be stark, somewhat plain. It begins with Ash Wednesday. So what could be an image of ashes or humility? And then see what they have to work with, and perhaps you'll go shopping. I also look in my closet. I have shawls that sometimes wind up on the altar. So just look around your house, look around your friends' houses, and think, what central message do you want to convey?
And there are several resources available.
Oh, absolutely.
Lots of books have been published on it. And the good thing about the books, of course, is that there are images of other things people have done. And these, instead of using things that you find, these might be more of a resource for people that want to make something else.
Start from scratch.
Yeah.
With any media, but especially fabrics.
Of course, there's the internet now, so all you need to
Right.
do is Google. You can,
Yeah.
Right.
I saw a youth group one time who, in their worship, they draped T-shirts that they
Oh.
particularly liked,
Yes.
either by the colors or by the messages that were on it. They used the T-shirts as their
Yes.
fabric of.
You need to start with a message. What is it that you want to convey? And then how can you convey it? And sometimes it's not fabric, but of course fabric is a good component of
right
that.
complement to about anything.
Yes, a
isn't it?
good way to start. The other thing I've run into sometimes people in churches that say, I'd love to help the church, but I'm not good enough. And of course, I jump right on that. Of course, we're good enough. You know,
Right.
we're members of
Right.
church's body
God makes us good
and
enough.
God's
doesn't
body, and so we're good enough. So they just need a little help, like what we were just saying here. You know, get some books, talk to your friends, talk to the minister. You're good enough. You're good enough because we all were given the gift of creativity.
he? Yeah.
and
Definitely.
that is such a powerful note to end on. And Anne Fraley, thank you for coming and sharing,
You're
and
welcome.
Patty Goddard from
Thank
Broadway
you.
United Methodist for
I
your
appreciate it.
gift today too. And we encourage you to explore this in your setting if the Spirit moves you.
Yeah.
Gregory, it's been good to be together again.
Very good. Always good.
And thank you for joining us here at Reflections. And however you can, whenever you can, please join us with Paducah Cooperative Ministry in doing God's work with human hands. Shalom.
Shalom.